Hey everybody, I'm Matt Millham. Welcome everyone to our webinar this evening, Roof Sheathing Code Updates and the Fortified System. I'd like to thank our sponsor for the evening, Huber Engineered Woods. I'm Matt Millham and I'll be your host for the evening. We already covered that. To get started, if you have any comments or questions, please direct them to the respective boxes at the bottom of your Zoom screen. When talking in the chat box, be sure to set your settings to all attendees and panelists. If you have a comment to share with everyone, we'll be taking questions throughout the evening. We have a great panelist of experts in the industry with us tonight. Let's introduce everyone, starting with Glenn Mathewson, former contractor, as an inspector and plan reviewer for 13 years. He now works as a professional consultant and educator on residential applications of construction codes. He is an author with over 90 published articles and the ICC's first industry-specific codebook, Deck Construction, based on the 2009 IRC, recently updated to 2021 in a second edition. He's also an advisor to the North American Deck and Railing Association. He is president of the buildingcodecollege.com, which provides on-demand code education. It's good, check it out. We got Mike Guertin, a Rhode Island builder and remodeler and advisor for Fine Homebuilding. After 35 years in the trades, he's still challenged every day to find more efficient ways to build things better. Mike's written over 100 articles for Fine Homebuilding and appears in dozens of videos. And he's a stand-up guy and was one of my favorite guys to work with when I was an editor at Fine Homebuilding. And I miss working there mostly just because I don't get to work with Mike all the time. We've also got.
Have you healed from that saw cut when it kicked back at your arm when we were working?
That wasn't me.
Just go with the joke. Never mind. Sorry.
Well,
I'll stay out of it.
Screwed it up. We've got Chris Clark as manager of Huber Engineered Woods product engineering team. Chris is a technical resource for providing consulting to contractors on the job site, as well as architects and engineers in regards to how Huber engineered wood products can be incorporated into their design to meet local building codes. Since graduating with a Master's of Science in Civil Engineering with a focus on structural engineering, his decade of industry experience is centered on the design requirements of wood frame structures. I did not trip all over that this time, Chris.
Good job.
Already doing better than last time.
Good job.
And Ben Murphy, who just joined. Thank you, Ben. He's a general contractor and member of Baldwin Home Builders Association, located in Foley, Alabama. His company has completed commercial construction and custom home projects throughout the Gulf Coast region. Guys, let's jump into it. Since the title of this is, let me go back to that. Roof sheathing code updates and the fortified system. Let's start with the code updates part of this. Glenn, this is sort of your wheelhouse. What can you tell us about what's new for roof requirements in the 2021 IRC?
Well, there's a couple new things, and it all starts with wind speeds and the updates to the wind speed maps in a document called ASCE 7. I've been warned not to just jump into the weeds with this, which I have a tendency to do because there's a path all of these code changes take, and often we talk about the end, and sometimes it's really neat to actually understand how this all happened. Because, for example, the changes you're seeing today in the published 2021 code, those were started in 2013. And that's how long of a process it often takes for us to see this published. So, one of the big and probably most shocking changes, the one that gets that headline is the typical pattern we've known forever of 6 and 12, 6 inches on your edges for your roof sheathing, 12 inches in the field. That has changed now to be a 6-inch and 6-inch pattern. So we basically went from 12-inch in the field to 6-inch in the field. And that's obviously the biggest shocker because it's an increase to cost of construction for your roof sheathing. And then when you get into the shingle part of it, your roof covering parts of it, I would say we saw from the 15 to 18 and then into the 21 code, lots of changes with underlayments and underlayment fastening, more specifics for your high wind regions. Underlayments keep it in place until you get into your high wind areas for wind design. And that's when we see all kinds of new prescriptive methods.
And what are those? Can you give us some details on what those are? I
Well,
mean,
yeah, I
without
mean,
getting super
sure,
in the
yeah. I
weeds,
mean,
guess.
there's an evolution to those. Obviously, there were a lot of proposals and a lot of interest in underlayment in the 2015 hearings for developing the 2015 IRC. And that's when we first got highlighted the using your 4-inch strips to seal your roof sheathing deck joints and basically create that sealed roof deck concept as part of that fortified system. That got recognized in the 2015 code, as an alternative for high wind, basically saying you could do this and then do your standard underlayment over top of it, sealing with 4-inch strips on your panel seams. And we see that presentation of that get cleaned up and adjusted in the 18 and into the 21 codes, where now we get, 2 distinct columns for underlayment in your not wind design regions, and that's going to be below 140. And then your underlayment fastening for your areas that require wind design. And that's where you're kind of outside prescriptive design at that point, but prescriptive design structurally. But for roof coverings, the code can still covers us there for those high winds. And that's where you can get the option of doing the strips and then just doing your standard underlayment over that. The other neat thing, I guess I would say that changed is the typical like double underlayment for low slope roofs. It's not really double. I hate referring to it that way because I've seen so many people think that it means you go up the roof twice with your typical lap. Double underlayment actually means it's a 19-inch lap, and then it creates a minimum of 2 layers throughout the roof. Double underlayment for low slope provisions between 2 and 4, that's now also the underlayment provisions for your high wind zones, regardless of roof pitch. But again, you could do the strips, and then you would only have to do the single layer. So there's, as quick as I could try to get that one out for you guys.
And I mean, I'm guessing that's not always necessarily like what you have to do. I mean, Chris, you work at Huber, so I mean, we're talking about zip system, roof sheathing. You're not putting something over on top of that. You're just kind of like plopping the panels in, nailing them off according to this new schedule, and then taping the seams, or you don't have to put anything else there, do you?
Yeah, correct. Like Glenn said, it gets you that sealed roof deck with its inherent installation process. So you do get the taping of the seams already as part of the system. And so what the zip does is it kind of takes that one step or one choice out of it, and you already get it there. Now in the lower slope areas where the 212 to 412, you would still need an additional layer over top just because of the slope of the roof. But in a more traditional higher slope or standard slope, I'll call it, it would take the place of needing that extra layer of underlayment because you already have the underlayment built into the system itself.
Cool. So Mike, you and I did an article on sort of like, I guess, building better roofs for, high wind. What was it, 2 or 3 years ago? It had to be at least 2 years ago, probably closer to 3 years ago now. And Ben does some like what I would call extreme things because he's actually in a hurricane zone. But I kind of want to baby step folks into this, and maybe we can go into sort of some of the details that you do in Rhode Island, because you're relatively close to the coast and you have winds and you are without power now. Nobody knows this, but Mike is running on a generator right now because we had a nor'easter blow through yesterday, and power is out in big parts of the Northeast right now.
Just for people to know that the article that we did was a couple of years ago, as Matt mentioned, but we also did a webinar. I want to say it was about 1.5 years ago.
Yeah.
And just like this webinar is being recorded, and you'll be able to see it in the future on finehomebuilding.com, you can see that webinar. I think it was roofing in high wind zones. And really, I patterned my installation for that, or that whole article, on the Fortified Home program, which is a program for improving elements of both the structure of the home as well as the roofing. So we're focused here on the roofing, but it was a program developed by the Institute for Business and Home Safety, an insurance industry group, to help builders and to promote, small upgrades in standard installation practices, both for sheathing installation and for the roofing installation, so that it will last longer and be more durable during a high wind event. And up where I am, we don't see a high wind event every year. It could be every 5 or 10 years, but when they come through, it's noticeable that we see a lot of damage. So the things that we covered in that article were things starting with the drip edge and how it gets installed. A lot of people don't think about the importance of the drip edge, both the contact area that it has, how much the drip edge laps over onto the sheathing, and then how it gets nailed. And then on top of that, if talking asphalt shingles in this instance, how the shingles get installed, and bonding the perimeter, which is the most perimeter being the eave edge, the rake edges, hips, and ridge, the most prone areas for wind uplift. So bonding that down in some roof cement or an alternative, and then using good the starter strips, and then nailing patterns of the shingles using a high wind nailing pattern. And something a lot of people don't focus on, and even the I don't even know if the Fortified program focuses on it, but with asphalt roof shingles, there's a layer or a small section where the 2 layers of laminated shingles are bonded together. And even though the manufacturers of shingles give us wide nailing zones, we're going to get better performance by focusing on driving the nails that we fasten the shingles down through that, what's called the common bond area, because you're trapping both layers of shingles at that point. And then there were a few other things we covered in the article, but those were some of the high points there.
Yeah. And Ben, I know you do some pretty extreme stuff down there from when the last time we talked. Can you kind of like walk us through what you do down there, and like both what a sealed deck looks like, and the drip edge and some of the other details you get into?
Yeah, so whether we're roofing a house or building a new construction, every house that we do has some element of the Fortified system. So if we're re-roofing a house, we do the Fortified roof, which entails basically the secondary water barrier. And what we've decided to do instead of taping the seams here works for us is we do full ice and water shield over the entire roof deck. And so that entailed with the drip edge, the staggered nailing pattern on the drip edge, the starter shingles, the high wind accessories, the ridge vents, all that have to meet the TAS 100A standard. So, all of those incorporated along with the Class 8 shingle, provides what the Fortified program calls a fortified roof. Now, what that does is, we go out and we do the work and have to document everything we do and submit to a third-party inspector. And then that third-party inspector goes on and submits the information documentation to the IBHS, which in turn issues the Fortified certificate. Now, here in the state of Alabama, the state mandates a insurance savings based upon which level of Fortified you get, whether it's Fortified roof, Fortified silver, Fortified gold. And here it's 25% off your wind and hail policy for Fortified roof, 35% for silver, and up to 50% for gold.
Wow.
So gold is really for new construction, which has to do with structural load paths, impact windows, that sort of thing. But I know that's for another day. But as far as the roof covering, along with, they were saying earlier, with the re-nailing of the roof deck, we have to go back and re-nail with ring shake nails, along the perimeter and in the field. So, and then if it's a gable roof, you have gable vent covers. You have to put a cover on the outside to prevent water intrusion.
Yeah, I'm curious what in your area, what you would do for roof venting if you're going to close off gable vents, because roof vents are, basically a hole that potentially could get water in it. So do you put anything for venting, or what would you use?
Yeah. So the gable vent covers are only in the event of a high windstorm. So if you got a hurricane coming, you go put so they don't stay on permanently.
Okay.
Yeah. So, you use a fabric or something to cover to prevent water intrusion into those vents.
And you mentioned the fortified certificates. My understanding is that those basically expire after 5 years. So you have to go back and get recertified at that point. Do you do a lot of that work too, or?
So, the Fortified program is relatively new. They're just now starting to get, from the first ones, they're hitting that 5-year mark. So, basically there's nothing as far as a contractor we have to do. If we installed it years ago and the homeowner does nothing to the house, the evaluator will come back to the house, basically make sure there's no hail damage. The homeowner didn't add on to the house. He's just certifying that everything there still meets the IBHS standards. So as far as us, there's nothing for us at that 5-year mark unless there is some sort of damage.
Okay. And one thing that came up the last time, and I meant to ask you, you mentioned Class 8 shingles. What is that? So
it's just a high wind rated shingle. Every manufacturer has a Class 8 shingle. Typically, it's 130 to 140 mile an hour. Got an approval rating. So it's the design and the testing of the shingle that meets minimum requirements.
Okay. Glenn, maybe you know this. What is there a minimum like leg for the drip edge that's supposed to go up on the roof?
Let's see, 2 inches. You're gonna make me do my memorization. One of the big thing of being a code guy is that how to go find the right answer.
Yeah,
I think
you don't need to know it off the top of your head.
2 inches up the roof deck, at least a 1/4 inch below the bottom of the roof sheathing, 2-inch lap, and nailing every 12 inches. How'd I do?
That sounds right, but I don't know off the top of my head. Mike probably does.
I gotta say, like Mike said, in my experience as a municipal building inspector, especially with your re-roofing projects, one of the biggest issues that would come up is sloppy framing. That, at the time, I mean, believe me, I was a framer in the late 90s. Like, framing can be sloppy because it's not finished work. So, I mean, there is a norm to that to a degree. But what happens is when that sheathing is short of the end of the rafter tail and there's a gapping that's there, and you would not believe the amount of houses out there where the sheathing is quite gapped from reaching the face of those truss tails. And then when the home gets re-roofed, back when the home was built, drip edge was not a mandatory requirement. Now it is. And they end up, if they do it right, they have to purchase a special drip edge that has more of a 4-inch flange, a longer one, to get all the way up so that they can get fastened. I've come across ones where the top 2 inches, that the gap was actually more than 2 inches, and the drip edge was just flopping there. So that one's fun.
Yeah.
Because that's one that hasn't always been required in the code. It's been part of the manufacturer's installation instructions, but only came into the code in like 2009 or something like that.
Yeah, I had come across on some forum a Canadian who was talking about drip edge, and they had no idea what was going on with that, because I guess it's just still not required up in Canada. So it's
well, and there's still people that don't think it should be. I think in 2018 there was a proposal, someone trying to remove that mandate. So it's, I mean, that's the great thing about code development, is it really is transparent. Like, I can research everything that happened all the way back. And it's open for everyone to come, contribute their ideas, and the code, and we reevaluate. So sometimes things get in the code and then we go, ooh, that was a mistake. And then it comes back out, or it gets tweaked and changed. Like this high wind stuff has been in the works for the last 3 code editions.
One of the things I've noticed that's a problem with drip edges, in addition to the size, because a lot of the roof legs on some standard drip edges are only 2 and 2.5 inches. And in addition to what Glenn was talking about, where there's that void between maybe the subfascia or the fascia line and the fascia and the roof sheathing. In addition to that, even if you have the sheathing going all the way down to the fascia or the subfascia, the problem can be that because of the way those are formed with a 90-degree bend in them, that you actually, because of the roof slope, you've got to actually push or rebend the drip leg on the face so that it sits flat against the fascia. So you're actually getting the full contact area of the drip edge onto the roof. That's why I've gone to using the 4 to 5 inch roof leg. Another problem I see with the drip edges, and Glenn, maybe you have a little bit of insight in this. So there are a couple sections of the code where the code says for flashings, they have to be 19 thousandths of an inch thick. But a lot of the drip edges that are stocked at local lumber yards, the economy ones, economy drip edges, they're only 11 thousandths of an inch. I've taken a micrometer and I've checked them. Is drip edge considered a flashing? And if it is, then a lot of the lumber yards are selling these thin ones. Now I know when I worked down in Florida, all the lumber yards, because like Ben, that's a high wind zone, basically the whole state. All their drip edges have a 2.5 to 3 inch drip leg, and they're at least, I got to say, they're at least 25 thousandths of an inch thick. They're very, very heavy gauge, probably because of the wind resistance that's required there.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, drip edge is a flashing. And to be quite honest with you, I mean, as an inspector, I mean, it's just not something, it's probably not something that most people are going to give attention to. You know, when you get into like sizes of your steel for duct work, when you get into like penetrating walls and fire stop systems, and where we got some life safety on the line, absolutely we're scrutinizing, you know, your gauge of your metal. To be honest, you know, I have a caliper, but have I ever used it as an inspector? No. And, you know, that's probably the kind of information that like inspectors could definitely serve to learn from those that are actually out there building it and understanding what products are available, what folks are selling, because there is no connection between a non-code compliant product and going to a lumberyard and buying it. There's no connection between retail sales and code. And so I can go to those places and see all kinds of code violations. So no, I don't think inspectors would ever bring that up, but now I've learned something that good.
Code inspectors
you know,
aren't working.
You mentioned about the flashing bending, just to add on to that, one of the big problems that happens when people don't unbend that 90-degree angle, and especially if the sheathing is short, is it creates a flat it flattens out. The roof comes down and flattens. And so you actually will get standing water sitting there because that 90 degrees sort of underneath kind of changes the shape of your shingles a little bit. And you'll get a little bit of residual ice leaving there. And it's not the end of the world, but obviously something maintaining in contact and saturation with water, you know, I'd have to presume that's going to reduce the life.
I'm curious for you guys who are doing some of these better roofs. I mean, Mike in your area and Ben in yours. I mean, when you get a severe wind event, can you tell which roofs do and don't have like either a fortified or you know, similar you know, type thing going on?
Yeah, well, we're fresh off Hurricane Sally, which we had just a little 13 months ago here, and you know, we've been doing the Fortified for about 10 years now, and we had houses that we had done, you know, 3 or 4 years ago, didn't have a shingle missing, didn't have any kind of problems. House next door had original, you know, 12, 15-year-old roof, completely blown off. And so, you know, we had plenty of those. The IBHS came in town and you know, did a little segment on some of these jobs we'd done. But you know, that was their real first test. You know, Alabama's the largest producer of the fortified system. So we had a good sample for them to come and view. And I think, you know, for the most part, it was a complete success. I think of the about 4,000 roofs that we have out there, I think maybe 2 or 3 of them had issues with the roof, and those were mainly just flying debris problems. Which, yeah, of course, you can't do anything about that.
Yeah. And like, how do you achieve that? Like, how do you get the roof to that point? Like, I mean, is it just using a Class H shingle, or is it
Well,
like
no,
it's also the nailing pattern, but you also got
yeah,
to make
it's,
sure it's stuck down?
I mean,
And
yeah, it goes all the way back to, when we strip the roofs all the way down to the plywood, we re-nail the roof deck, completely re-nail it with ring shank nails, all new drip edge with, a staggered nailing pattern. Full ice and water shield. We've decided company-wide to do full ice and water shield over the entire roof deck. So that way we don't have a tape the seams and a synthetic on top of it. So we've just, as a company decided that was our route. So then you got your starter shingle, that goes with the manufacturer, whether it's a mastic and a regular shingle or an adhesive rolled starter. Then you got your Class 8 shingles. Like I said, every manufacturer makes one. And then, your ridge vents, your off ridge vents, all have to meet the TAS 100A certification. And, all that comes together. And like I said, we document everything for that third party inspector. And, they give the homeowner certificate. And here, with 25% on your homeowners doesn't sound a whole lot, but you've got, it's not uncommon to have a $3,000 to $5,000 to $10,000, insurance policy on a house down here, on the coast.
wow.
How do you find the homeowners' interest in making those upgrades for the Fortified program?
Of course, just like anything else, when it first started, it was a little slow getting off the ground. We worked closely with Alex Carey with IBHS trying to promote this system. And of course, it's just like anything else, something new. You walk to a homeowner, explain it to you. They look like you got a monkey on your head. It took a lot of persuasion. Well, once the state of Alabama made it the mandatory insurance savings, and the insurance agents started understanding the process, the ball really started rolling. So once that came, and then all the local municipalities here really started adopting the standard. So, over the past 10 years, the ball really rolled, and just about everybody now knows, hey, I've got, I want a fortified roof. That's what I want. And, especially with the code requiring all of the aspects of the roof system to meet it, you might as well pay the third party inspector to give you that certificate, to give you your insurance savings. So, and now everybody, and especially right after Hurricane Sally, the proof was here, and everybody saw it. And we're still doing Hurricane Sally roofs 13 months after, and every one we put on, is a fortified roof. So everybody here understands it and knows it. So it's pretty much common here.
Man.
I saw a question just came in. What will these upgrades add to the cost of a job? I guess meaning a roof replacement.
Yeah, so since it's common here and everything's required, the last time we really did a analysis of it, it was about a $1,500 upgrade. Now, the biggest challenge for us when this program started was getting our installers on board. Basically, handing a framing gun to a roofing contractor, what do I do with this? So it took a while to get everybody on board, training them how to do it, how to document everything, training all of the guys how to do it. That was the challenge. And once it became commonplace, the guys were like, okay, well, in our business, we chose to do the full ice and water shield versus taping the seams and the synthetic. Well, it came to be, and we ran the numbers, almost a complete wash in the cost because of the extra labor of basically having to put the tape in the seams and the synthetic over it. So, once we kind of hammered it down, we figured it about $1,500, and that's mainly in your extra nails, your whether you're taping the seams, the ice and water shield.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing, as the code guy, I have to be the obnoxious one and just remind everyone, we all talk just to communicate, like, duh. But when you get into the code, I want to make sure everybody knows the words they're looking for. So in the code, you're not going to find proprietary terms like ice and water shield. You're going to find self-adhering polymer modified bitumen membrane. And that's a lot harder to say than ice and water shield. But just remember that that's from one brand, and you wouldn't find that when you see in the code self-adhering polymer modified bitumen membrane. That's what we're talking about. Now everyone hates me.
No, that's good to know, because somebody's going to look
Yeah.
that up. And they're like, I don't see ice and water in the
Yeah.
code.
As an
Yes.
inspector, like, we had to be very careful. As a government inspector, you do not refer to Studer vents, or, you refer to air admittance valves. You refer to self-adherent polymer modified bitumen. You don't write on your tickets. And so it's a trained thing, but it helps the public when hopefully they do go look in the code to know, what some of those terms are.
And Glenn, what's the ASTM standard that membrane has to meet?
D1970.
D1970.
It is. That's what it is. I knew the answer.
Yeah.
Which for most people isn't going to mean a lot, but I mean, this is getting way in the weeds. But there are several products that don't meet that are sold for that purpose.
Absolutely.
That probably would function well for what we're talking about, but it's not a one-for-one, particularly when you get into the ice barrier membranes, which a lot of people think of when they think of ice and water shield. So
yeah, I mean, people ignore that stuff on all of that proprietary, house wrap, all those proprietary synthetics for your replacing your water resistive barrier with something else. You'll see on there ASTM, all of the labels, and that's there. So inspectors like me and people know, obviously it's the inspectors usually looking for it, but hey, the code is for all of us. So even contractors and the public, like, that message is there for you to know this does meet the standards. And the manufacturers love, they print that all over their stuff usually.
So Matt, there's two questions that are kind of in parallel that just came up in the chat that are questions that I get all the time, even though it's not specifically related to, a Fortified program. It might be good to address them just because I think a lot of other people might have. One is, do you place ice and water or the polymer modified, over, got to capture it before it disappears, over an unvented roof? And the other question is, someone read somewhere that covering the entire roof with the membrane doesn't allow for the roof to breathe. And is this a concern? So, I mean, I can answer them, but I was curious, Ben, do you ever put the ice and water that you put on over unvented roofs, or do you just do them over vented roofs?
No, they're on every roof, vented, unvented. We do them both.
Okay.
Yep.
So over both of them. And I do the same. If I'm going to put it on and cover it continuously, there's not really any concern whether it's a vented or unvented roof for the most part. There have been cases where people have pointed to covering the roof with a membrane like that at being a place where you're going to get condensation on the underside of the roof sheathing, and then they attribute the rot of the roof sheathing and the rafters due to covering the whole roof. But it's been shown many times over that a standard roof shingle installed properly is a class 1 vapor barrier. So even if you put nothing on the roof, as soon as you put those shingles on and they seal, the moisture is not going to go through the roof anyway. And then regarding the breathing of the roof, don't worry, your roof doesn't have to breathe. If you want to ventilate the attic, that's perfectly fine. Where the moisture concerns are moisture coming from inside the house into an attic space, condensing on the underside of the roof sheathing. That's a function of air sealing your attic and a function of moisture control inside the house. It's not a function of how the roof assembly is done. So in both cases, we can safely put a membrane over the entire roof. Does anybody disagree with that?
No, I totally agree with that. And we have those conversations quite a bit, especially with ZIP when we get into some of the northern climates when they're putting the ice and water shield guys want to put it over the entire roof. And that's one thing to note is zip is not a replacement of ice and water or the peel and stick membranes for the ice damming purposes. So those products still need to be installed over ours as well. But that question does come up quite a bit, is like, well, is it going to rot my roof sheeting out? I'm like, if you have a good air seal and control at your ceiling level, then no. But there is a section in the building code, and not to get too deep in the weeds, but I think it's 806. It talks about roof ventilation, and there's like steps to try to help mitigate that. Especially if you're doing an unvented space where you have insulation on the indirect contact with your bottom of your roof sheeting, and there's steps and minimum R values and types of insulation to use to help mitigate that risk of condensation, like Mike was mentioning. So just another tidbit there. But yeah, it's one conversation I think a lot of people are having more and more these days, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Ben, I'm curious, like, what made you land on doing the full ice and water shield over the roof? Because I mean, it is more expensive. A lot of people balk at the idea just because of the expense of that. But I'm just curious why you decided to go that way and not with one of the others. And I'm also curious if like Zip System has made it down there, and if you would use that instead if it showed up in your local lumberyard.
Yeah, the difference is when we ran the cost both ways with the full ice and water shield and the tape and the seams. Taping the seams and the synthetic seem to be more labor intensive on our guys, and especially where we are, it's 95 degrees 7 months a year, it seems like, and the guys are, so to minimize their time on the roof, their labor, it was, at the end of the day, it really was like a $2 or $3 a square difference. Yeah. And just we decided across the board to do full ice and water shield. Now, that being said, we do some other programs that require us to do full ice and water shield. So, in order, for the guys not to have to go to the job sites, think about it, for $2 or $3 a square, we decided, just across the board, let's do it. Makes it a lot easier, increases our buying power with the material. So it ends up being, like I said, a minimal cost. And it was just a company decision to minimize the guys' times on the roof in the hot weather.
Yeah, and that's what it is. I mean, it comes down to cost, and like you said, it's what fits your business model and what your guys are comfortable with. And it's some guys want to do just the taping of the seams, and that's great. But yeah, it's whatever gets to the same end goal, I think is what works best for whoever the installer is at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Even though we're talking about, high wind zones, a lot of people don't think about other parts of the country that experience either real brief storm bursts of high wind. Also, they don't always think about hailstorms and the damage that they can do to roofs. Yep. And by doing the sealed roof deck, by just putting the tape on the seams of all the sheathing, that can really be a real backup to the underlayment if it's ever damaged in a hailstorm. A lot of people think, they don't get hurricanes in the middle part of the country, but they can get a lot of hailstorms that can damage it. And that extra backup of having the joint sealed, whether it's zip or whether it's just regular generic sheathing with those sealed joints, that will prevent, like 95% of the water getting into the house. And that's really where the insurance claims come from. It's in the damage to the inside of the house, not so much on the roof itself.
Yeah.
And tornadoes is another one too. I mean, I know they can cause a lot more damage than just hail, but I think that's something else to think about as well.
Yeah, the IBHS has got a testing facility in South Carolina that they've got some really neat videos of some tests. And they've got a house that they've constructed inside this basically chamber that can, produce, hurricane force winds. And they've taken this house that they built, just taped the seams, and they dumped, a bunch of water on it. I don't know how many off the top of my head, how many inches per hour they were throwing on this roof. And they had cameras inside, and the amount of water that was being held outside of the house because of that tape seam versus the other side of the house, which had nothing on it, was unbelievable. But if you can go to the IBHS's website and or either on YouTube and look at these videos, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah. I know there's been a few comments about Miami-Dade and things like that. And I know the state of Florida is starting to adopt a lot of the sealed roof deck requirements, but once you get down into Miami-Dade, there's other things that come into play. And Ben mentioned it earlier about the windborne debris and resiliency there. And so there are some other building practices that need to come into play when you're in those types of areas with that requirement.
Mike mentioned the regions that aren't high wind, and we've been talking a lot right now about all the high wind regions and the changes there. But I wanted to go back to the comment I made at the very beginning of this about the structural provisions for fastening your sheathing down changed in the 2021 from being 12 inches in the field to being 6 inches in the field. But that change was not just for high wind areas. That was a change in the minimum prescriptive for all the areas. But I wanted to provide a little more commentary to that because, obviously that makes people immediately think very negative, like, oh, the code's making everything more expensive now. Now, nothing changed in the wind zones in the middle of the country, but I got to put more nails in. What happened to this is when those wind tables expanded, that's done by the American Society of Civil Engineers. We have a lot of different organizations involved with this. This is their book, ASCE 7, that determines the loads. And so those are the experts that do the testing and research to say, hey, winds are different and the loads are different now. And then you get the American Wood Council, and they are a huge player in evaluating all of that data. Their membership is incredibly engineers that are very good with wood design. And so they then analyze those changes in wind, and AWC is typically the proponents to then bring those changes into the code. But what I want to get to with this is, so the American Wood Council produces this book, the Wood Frame Construction Manual. This is a direct reference from the IRC. So what I'm holding here is just as valid as the IRC, as the code itself. But look how big that book is for wood frame. So it has tremendous more variables for pre-engineered design, or what's called prescriptive design. Many more tables, many more variables to produce a much more exact result. Well, then they'll bring to the code, well, we can't have an entire book that big just for this one subject. So what they'll then do is remove a lot of the variables to basically make it, one size fits all, like a hat that you have to make some adjustments. And so they removed those variables, and here's what we end up with. The wind loads changed in one way. The code never recognized anything below 110. And everything prescriptively, basically at 110. Even if your wind load is actually lower, doesn't matter, you build into 110. Well, part of the expanded wind tables are now bringing that load all the way down to 90. So we have regions now with a lower wind load down to 90. But for simplification in a code so that we can use it, those variables you'll find in the Wood Frame Construction Manual, but not in the IRC. So the IRC is assuming 24-inch on center trusses, which means less nailing, per density of area. They're assuming 110 wind zone, and that's where we now get the 6-inch nailing in the field. So if you perhaps are doing a cut-in roof, maybe where you're not 24-inch on center for whatever reason, and you're down to 19.2 layout or a 16 or a 12, that's going to change your nailing requirements. And then also, if you happen to be in a lower wind zone than 110, that would change you. And basically you go to this book and you can go right back to the 6 and 12 that you've always been doing. Long story, but I wanted to make sure people realize that, yes, the IRC went to 6-inch field nailing, but they removed tons of variables. And so that's just the easy way. Like Bob or Bill would probably just, or like Mike was saying, I just nail the heck out of it anyway. So it's no big deal to you. But if you wanted to get more specific, you can go to that Wood Frame Construction Manual, and a lot of the places of the country, you could still do your 6 and 12 nailing.
Well, there's one thing regarding nailing, and I know Ben knows about this because it's when the Fortified Home evaluator checks the roof, they can do it either through photographs or actually going on site. They're checking to make sure that the nails aren't overdriven.
Mhm.
And that's super, super important with regard to the roof sheathing, because so frequently some of the upgrades that need to be done are just good building practice anyway. What we should be doing from a baseline anyway, like not overdriving the nails with either with the roof shingles or with the sheathing fastening.
Mhm.
So that's an important aspect. That's just quality of construction.
Yeah, and you can actually go the American Panel Association for wall sheathing, because overdriving your fasteners in your braced wall and shear wall panels is incredibly common, but it's common correction item for inspectors.
Mhm.
But rather than telling people, you never just want to say, oh, that's wrong, tear it all down. There's always options. There's always choices. And like American Panel Association creates tech notes because they know people mess up. And then they want to support their products. So there's actually a tech note that's been out for a long time about overdriven wall sheathing, and you get percentages of reduction. And it'll tell you, 1/16 of an inch, not a concern. But as you get deeper, and it's a pretty tremendous percentage of shear capacity reduction. But you can search APA tech note overdriven fasteners, and that's a free, legitimate document folks can use to remedy if they have overdriven, or to evaluate how much they truly have affected the shear resistance. Granted, that's shear resistance more speaking for walls than uplift for roofs, but
Yeah.
always
Chris,
love
I
to
know you
provide
guys have
details.
those same kind of technical documents too.
Yeah, it's
same things.
that's it. Like you said, it's just about the trying to better the building practices and how we can educate these builders and installers and try to get them out of some of the I guess bad habits, so to speak. And it is educating them on things like that. And we referenced the APA document, and PFS Tico is another company that does some of that research as well. And it's like Glenn said, I mean, it's kind of eye-opening to kind of say, it's like, well, yeah, I'm just shooting these nails in, not really caring how deep they go. But I mean, if you do a whole wall and they're 1/8 of an inch, I mean, you're talking about significant reduction in shear. And if you're in a high wind zone, I mean, that's detrimental. That's important. That's critical. And so it's then you got to start thinking, well, now I got to add more in. Well, if you're already at a 4/12 pattern, let's say for shear, and you start adding in more nails at the edge, you're at 2 inches on center. Now you're compromising the stud quality and whether or not you're splitting that stud, and then it can kind of really kind of have a trickle down effect pretty quickly.
Yeah. So you builders, how do you do it, Mike? What do you got? Do you flush nailer collar or back off the pressure on the compressor? What's your recommendation to the other guys?
Well, nowadays, most of all of the modern nailers have a depth of drive adjustment. It's not like
I'm an old framer.
Right. No, I know. I've been framing since the 80s when, you'd have to put in inline or right at the tool, you'd have to put a pressure adjustment. But yeah, with the depth of drive, there's no excuse for overdriving nails. There was I want to say it was at least 12 years ago at the Builder Show, that Bostitch, when they came out with their Hurricane nail. It was a special nail. Anyway, they had a machine. They'd actually put sheathing down on the machine. They'd nail it according to code, and then with overdriven nails, and they do a bunch of different tests, and it would vacuum up. It would simulate the wind uplift, and it was amazing what overdriven nails would do. And it would just pull, the sheets would come off. And anybody who's ever tried to pull roof sheathing off of a roof with overdriven nails, no, once you get under the edge, you can pretty much lift the sheet up without much effort. So it does make a difference.
When I'm teaching, I use the analogy of paper and stapling paper. You could have a whole chunk of paper stapled together. If you grab one piece, you're going to pull it right off. And that signifies, how much the staple is only engaging in a part of your thickness, and so the deeper that fastener goes, you're only holding less and less, layers of your paper, so to speak.
You guys want to take some questions here?
Oh.
One, any comments on the Tesla roof?
I want to see it.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I've seen the shingles and I haven't done a lot of research on it, but I mean, to answer Armando's question, I mean, if it comes down to some sort of resilient roof design or installation, I would kind of defer back to Tesla on that. I don't know how helpful they'll be, but I would look at maybe if you could fasten it at a tighter pattern, or what the actual resilience is of those shingles and what type of wind pressure have they been designed for, tested for, would be kind of a start. To kind of get an idea of what type of a product you're getting if it wasn't a high wind event.
Yeah, and check the warranty.
Yeah.
See what it covers.
And I think I'd go with Ben's approach and put some peel and stick on the entire roof just as a backup.
Agreed.
You know, I've been on the first adopters of any products are taking a risk. So that's what I always tell people. If you're the first person using, I mean, great, good on you for being willing to try out a new product. But even though the manufacturer will, you know, have warranties, guarantees, or whatever, you're still the first adopter, and there are going to be some bumps along the road.
What I can say that's kind of neat, I think it's neat, is that the code hearings for developing the codes, Tesla's there. Tesla has representation there. They were just, I mean, I just was speaking with the guy a couple months ago. They're involved with energy storage systems. They're involved with these photovoltaics. And so I think that's that's professional. They're taking part in helping contribute their knowledge and their technological advances and trying to help, make sure the code is recognizing that appropriately. So I think it's cool.
You know, one thing about the Tesla roof that Charles Myers just pointed out, and is that in my region, as in his, only licensed electricians are allowed to install them. So I'm a little, do you want a licensed electrician installing your roof?
Do you want a roofer installing your electrical?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's yeah, who are you gonna have?
Would be good there. Let's get some variety and expertise together and work together. That's always best.
Yeah. And Mike, there was another question that you kind of answered already, but what are other acceptable underlayments other than ice and water shield that provide a good alternative? And your response to him was basically regular number 30 tar paper synthetic underlayment. There are a bunch of options in the Fortified manual. If you look at it, like the new 2020 version of it, that's on, I think, page 33, and they cover a whole bunch of different things. I can link that in there for you guys so that you can actually see that. It would be good to have a link
up there. The one thing I noticed, and I may not have read deep into it. So there have been several versions of the Fortified Home program over the past, 8 or 10 years, and it just seems that they have little tweaks here and there. And I did not see synthetic underlayment as being an option in the most recent version, but I could be wrong on that. Ben, do you happen to know if synthetic underlayment is allowed in the current version?
As long as you tape the seams, you can use synthetic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you have to, unless you're using a peel and stick like an ice and water membrane, you have to tape the seams with any sort of mechanically fastened underlayment.
And with all of those underlayments, whether it's a 30-pound tar paper or building paper, or if it's the synthetic, you have to follow a very specific fastening schedule with cap fasteners. So it's not, that's one of the things I think Ben was referring to when he said, when he did a cost analysis, it was when you peel and stick the whole roof versus the labor and materials for doing a regular underlayment job, it's almost a wash. So you get the extra added benefit of something that when you put the fastener through, it kind of seals around the shank of the fastener as well.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Plus less nails in a roof.
Yep.
And remember, that's still just your high wind. So in your areas that are below your 140 mile an hour wind, I love it. The code actually just says sufficient to secure it in place.
until the shingles go on.
Exactly, because your underlayment at that point just needs to be there till you get your shingles on. And then you go to the column for special wind design regions, and you get a book, of
Yep.
details with diameter of cap nails and all the stuff.
Mhm.
I would just like to say, because, again, code, so many people hear things about the code and they just cling to the negative side of it. So that's why I keep wanting to step in and be like, well, it's not always that way. There's, if you're not in these regions, there are other options. The code is not always negative. There's a lot more positive options and choices in that book than people are willing to take the time to go learn.
Yeah.
Ben, do you do anything other than asphalt shingles on your roofs? I'm just curious, like what, some other roofing materials, how would they perform? Or if you can kind of like give us an idea of like how, like say, like standing seam or metal shingles compares to asphalt shingles.
Yeah, we do metal and shingles. We do basically a classic rib panel, our panel, wherever you are, whatever manufacturer, and a standing seam. As far as the underlayments requirements from the metal down, it's all the same as the shingle. You got your high temp ice and water versus your granular ice and water is really the only difference. And the Fortified program has required the metal manufacturers to have their wind testing, fastener testing. If you're within 1,000 feet of a salt body of water, your fasteners have to meet the stainless steel. There's a lot of components depending on what part of the water, how far you are from the water, what zone you're in. But yeah, as far as everything that goes on, it's the underlayments, the eave metal, the drip edge, it's all the same, except for the actual panels themselves.
And how do they, have you noticed any difference in performance, or all of those roofs kind of make it through?
Yeah, I mean, the Fortified program, the Fortified roof program, being driven by the insurance companies, their main focus is to keep water out of the house. If the shingles were to blow off, the metal panels were to blow off, that secondary water barrier is there to keep the water out, which in turn reduces insurance claims, which, in turn, makes the insurance companies more money, blah, 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 blah. So anyway, that's how that came about. As far as how they performed Hurricane Sally, both of them performed outstanding. Had no issues with either one. Like I said, the only issues we had would be with either flying debris, some sort of a damage on a panel from a tree or something like that. But as far as performance, they all kept water out just fine. Cool.
I guess I would wonder if the like the longevity of the ice and water is as long as some of these metal roofs that they say are supposed to last 100 years or more. Like, is the
so this last year, Hurricane Sally, we put 700-800 roofs on. I can't keep track of where we're at with it. And then earlier this year in 2021, we had a severe hailstorm. So we had to go back and re-roof several of the houses that we had just re-roofed from hail damage. So part of our concern was, okay, what's the ice and water shield done, through a summer event? Has the ice and water shield, bonded to the plywood? Where are we at? What's happening? We were a little nervous about that. So the ice and water shield held up great as far as, when we tore the shingles off and redid it, minimal damage to the ice and water shield during the tear off. So
That's good.
Yeah, it was. I mean, that's everybody's a little nervous when we talk about ice and water shield. What's going to happen 15 years from now when we do a roof tear off? What conditions the ice and water shield going to be in? Has the ice and water shield bonded to the plywood? If we do a tear off, are we going to be redecking the houses? All those questions have come up, and as from what we've seen so far is, the ice and water shield, the longevity has survived and done and performed just fine on the tear off.
There's one comment here. Someone says they use a watered down version of the 2012 IRC where they're at. And I just thought it'd be another little important thing to mention, because we're talking about the 2021 IRC. is like, there are no governments really on the 2021 IRC right now. I mean, they may be, some offshoot regions that have been, but no state government has gone to it yet. Denver's working on it now. Most of the United States is on the 15 code, and some of them are just getting to the 18 code, and there are still some out there on the 12 and older. So something the public is often very misunderstood about how all this works is, yeah, the 2021 code's published, we're talking about it today, but that is not necessarily what your government building authorities are using for the minimum standards of your construction in your area. Now, in a high wind area, they probably are focused on that subject and have, changed to their restrictions, but just bear that in mind. Your new homes in your state may be being built on the 2015 code right now, and that's pretty normal.
Yep.
Yeah.
One thing I didn't mention about the Fortified is the roof, the decking thickness.
Right.
We do have a minimum 7/16. So, some of the older houses built in the 70s and early 80s may have a 3/8 inch decking. So, if we do run into that scenario, we do have to redeck. It's few and far between, but it does happen. So that is one of the requirements that I failed to mention.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one. And do you know, is that going to change? I saw that there's some requirements for 15, 30 seconds, I guess, or whatever it is, a slightly thicker in some instances, but I don't think it's across the board.
Yeah, I know, well, at least the state of Florida, I think they're going more with the minimum 15, 30 seconds now versus allowing 7/16 statewide. So I know that's one big change that we've seen come about. But I would think in more some of these higher wind areas, just from the structural design for the uplift loads, you may, and even some of the metal roofings. I know some of the testing that they have to get for the high wind attachment is a minimum 15, 30 seconds in substrate to nail into or fasten to. So.
Yeah, that's a good point. Basically, the thicker the sheathing, the better attachment you're going to get is just really like what it comes down to, like the staple analogy that Glenn had earlier.
Yep. As far as new construction, code here, we're at 5/8 inch decking on new construction. The Fortified standard is the 7/16 on a retrofit. So, like I said, we run into 3/8 from time to time, and we have to redeck them. But as far as new construction here, we're at 5/8.
And I just a question came up for me is, do you see any older like solid decking roofing still? And if so, are you still just ice and water over that, or do you actually put sheeting down over top and then ice and water?
So are you talking about like a 1x6 or a tongue and groove?
Yep.
So so as long as the 1x6, there's no gap between them. As long as they've run them seal tight, we can run direct ice and water shield to it. Now, if there's a space or a gap between them, then we do have to redeck them.
Gotcha.
And what
that's another thing that gets misunderstood sometimes out there, not in this discussion about the Fortified system, but when it comes to the gapping in what's called lumber sheathing, the olders, and that's still in the code today. You could build a house with lumber sheathing today.
Still in the code.
There's a phrase in the code talks about you have to have a solidly sheathed deck. And people will often think a solidly sheathed deck means a wood structural panel and not lumber sheathing. And it's a difference between solidly sheathed and actual skip sheathing or spaced sheathing. And now, obviously, a 1x6 period, you're going to have small gaps between the 1x6, just basic shrinkage of that material and the slight crowning as it's installed. Those little tiny gaps, again, not talking about Fortified, but just that is not what the code is talking about when it talks about spaced sheathing or needing solid sheathing. Those little gaps are not what the code's talking about. They're talking about the style of sheathing when it was not actually a diaphragm on the roof and you had large gaps because the sheathing boards were nothing more than a nailing strip for your wood shingles. And so there were literal, this kind of gap between them. So not related to Fortified, but a lot of places out there believe you have to reskin every single roof if it's got lumber sheathing with little tiny, 1/8 inch gaps. And that's a misunderstanding.
Cool. Well, guys, I think we've run out of time. Anybody have any last thoughts they want to pass on before we call it quits?
Hey, Ben, someone asked the question and I was thinking the same thing. So I got to hear you answer. When you got that roof that got hail damage and 3 years later you're replacing it, I was thinking the same thing. Do you tear the old ice and water shield off? Do you go over it?
So, with the granular ice and water shield, the granules acted as a bond breaker. So it peeled right off just fine. We did have some damage from the spades and shovels, but, those we could just run new ice and water shield over those areas. But as far as peeling it all the way off, we did not know.
Whew, that would not be fun.
No.
Well, yeah, decking's going to come with it.
I had to squeeze that last one in. I wanted to know too. So.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, guys, thank you so much for your time. Everybody, I hope you got your questions answered. Again, want to thank Huber Engineered Woods for sponsoring this. And I'm very glad that it went much more smoothly than last time. You guys probably didn't know on the back end that we recorded one back in February and we got kicked off like 10 minutes in and like scrambled to get back on. And Ben was in his truck and, Chris was, I'm sure, like scrambling, trying to figure out what's going on at home. So thank you everybody for, pitching in on this and making it a great night.
And
Awesome.
Matt,
Thanks.
if anybody does have questions that either we didn't get to or you think of afterwards, feel free to send them into Fine Homebuilding, and they can either shuttle them off to one of us or somebody will usually get back to you with an answer.
Yeah, or this video also is going to be posted on probably finehomebuilding.com and on their YouTube page. And you could probably also post some questions there. And oftentimes people get to them. Not always. Great. Well, have a good night, everybody. It was great talking to you.
So long.
All right.